Hello, and welcome back to Book Talk with Kara. Today, I am delighted to introduce you to my friend, Stephen James. He writes some of the most amazing suspense, but we're not here to talk about the Patrick Bauer series, though that is one of my truly favorite thriller series of all time. And we could probably talk for hours about Patrick Bowers and that whole series. But Stephen, before we start, I guess, book gushing about all of your suspense, could you
That's fun.
tell our listeners and watchers a little bit about yourself and your books?
Yeah, I fell in love with storytelling whenever I was a kid, and my uncle would actually tell us stories. My brother and my sister and myself, family get-togethers, holidays, whatever. He would take my siblings and myself into a corner of the room. And he'd get this look in his eye, and he'd say, "I'm gonna tell you a story." And so he'd tell us these campfire stories and scary stories, ghost stories, whatever it was. And I just fell in love with stories and storytelling. And so eventually, I never thought I'd be a writer, but eventually I went to this, I guess in 2001, I went to a workshop. I was like, I want to write a novel. Like I've got this idea for a novel. And I went to a workshop and the guy teaching it said, now the first thing you have to do is write a 40-page single space outline of your book, and then you can start writing it. And this was, yeah, 2001. And I was like, what? Like, I don't even know how to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't have any interest in that. And so I put it aside. So about 4 years went by, and I had this idea for this detective, a one-armed detective for whatever reason. And finally, I started writing this. I was like, I don't know anything about the outline stuff. I'm just going to write this book. So it ended up becoming The Pawn, my first Patrick Bowers novel. He's not a one-armed detective. He's a geospatial investigator. But that was my first novel, really. And so I've done, I guess, 19 since then, 18 or 19, depending on how you count some stuff. But so I did 11 in that series, all FBI thrillers and suspense, and then I've done a couple of other series over the years. And this new one is with a totally different character, totally different world. And so it's been an interesting journey. You know, it's like I say, I never thought I'd be a writer. I loved stories and storytelling, and then I just pursued it like it was a passion of mine. And so years went by and I just started writing my book, and people ask, how'd you get started? And I'd written some nonfiction books, but I just had this passion to write a big story. And if you would have asked me in 2005 if I ever thought I would have written 19 novels or whatever, I said, no, that's crazy. Like I never would imagine. I just want to write one, maybe someday. So it was cool to be able to pursue that sort of passion and dream and just do it for 20 years.
It is amazing because I think a lot of us start with that. We're like, if we could just write one, that
Yeah.
would be pretty amazing. And then we
Yeah.
get down the road and like, I'm writing book 41 right now. You're
Yeah.
at 19 novels, plus then you've written some nonfiction books on
Mm.
writing. And, just there's something about storytelling that could kind of take over. And you don't just write books, though. You write books that are embedded in kind of a unique aspect, like Patrick Bowers with the geospatial
Mm.
profiling. And then in the new series, the main character, although they are kind of an ensemble cast, but
Mm.
your main point of view character, it has this adactic, or I mean this incredible memory, and he
Yeah.
sits there and redacts in the Pentagon. How
Yeah.
did you come up with that? Because I'm like, did you just wake up one night and go, I think my next main character is going to be sitting in the bowels of the
I know,
Pentagon,
right?
reading
And
everything, and someone's
with
gonna
a
want
butt
his
marker.
memory. Yeah, I mean, like his fingertips are gonna be Sharpied
I
black.
know. I know. Um, so yeah, it's interesting. I thought I'd done, like I said, 11 books with this FBI character, and I wanted to do something that people hadn't seen before. And so people have done, CIA books, NSA, Secret Service, FBI, all of those types of stories. And I was like, but I want to do a spy espionage story in a world that we haven't seen. And I was less like, well, it'd be interesting if there was a person who knew all our secrets. So, he works in the basement of the Pentagon, Travis Brock, and he has this almost photographic memory where he basically has been studying for 15 years all of our top secret programs. And then when someone writes a Freedom of Information Act request, he decides this can be released, this cannot, this has to get redacted. And so I thought, well, what if you had a character who knows all our secrets more than even the president, but he has a secret of his own. And so that was what led to the first book, Broker of Lies. And then he ends up with these other two characters for Fatal Domain. Like you said, it's kind of an ensemble, the three of them. But I fell in love with him, really. He's an interesting, character. He's not perfect. He isn't, he's kind of becoming more of an action hero. Like he doesn't start that way, but sort of I guess his journey is toward that. But he's not complete egghead either. Like he's smart, he's courageous and grounded. Um, and every book we study a different secret that he has learned about in his work at the Pentagon.
But and I love how he isn't perfect.
Yeah.
He's got scars, very
Yeah.
physical and I guess more emotional scars. But then, like you said, he's not an action hero. And like I love the Daniel Silva, Gabriel Alon series, and he is an action hero. He's
Yeah.
totally like this action hero from the beginning, but also very broken in lots of
Mm.
ways. But with Travis, he's just not. One of the scenes in Fatal Domain is him trying to shoot, and he can hardly figure out how to hold the gun. And so, he's this so not an action hero. He's not Captain America,
Yeah.
but yet in some ways that makes him even more likable. So, how did you decide that, he's in the literally like subterranean part of the Pentagon, and you're going to pluck him out of there and then cast him into these crazy like high stakes races?
Yeah. Well, I had also heard about this thing called the Red Team that the Homeland Security has. These people that go to basically TSA checkpoints and try to sneak weapons past. And this maybe 5 years ago, I heard a story, I think on NPR, about this group, the Red Team, and they were like 96% effective in getting weapons past our security.
That's
But
awesome. I'm so
yeah,
glad
like
to know that.
yeah, I know, right? And I was like, what? Who knew about this? And so, yeah, they try to get bomb parts passed or guns or weapons, knives and stuff like that. And they're, like I say, almost 100% effective in doing so. And so I thought, well, what if you had a character on the red team? And so Adira, who has become is sort of the love interest in this story. She is kind of more of the kick-ass spy. She has all of those kind of skills. And so, I love action, I love intrigue, all of this kind of stuff, betrayal and spies and stuff. So I thought, well, if he has is learning, but she already has this asset, then you can have this interesting kind of combination of the two skill sets. And so then I toured the Pentagon a couple of times to research the book. And it was very fascinating. And I kind of added a few things, but I tried to be as authentic as I could in describing what it's like inside the Pentagon for the story. And then the third character that they end up with is a former military guy who's as tough as nails, Gunnar Bain, but he's also trying to write a romance novel, and he
It's
thinks
so
he's really
ridiculous.
good, but he's literally not very good at it at all. And so he's this really kind of quirky and interesting character too. And he'll write something like, Donovan reached over and touched Tracy's arm and stroked her skin, the largest and most visible organ on her body. And you're just like, that is so bad. But anyway, it was totally fun writing his parts because I would basically sit there and say, like, what is the worst romance writing I could do? And then like I'll let Gunner do it. And so the book is
It
not a
is so
romance.
terrible. It
It's
is
so
just
fun though to write it.
it. Oh, I bet it was a hoot. I bet you were
Yeah.
just sitting there cackling as you're
Yeah.
writing some of those lines.
Trying to write those lines. And, I had to read a bunch of bad romance in order to sort of get in my mind what would really be bad. But anyway,
Well,
so
and
yeah, they're
Adira,
fun characters.
Adira, like there was a scene I was just reading last night or this morning where I was like, oh my gosh, I had Black Widow moments where I was just
Oh,
like,
yeah.
she's Scarlet. It's just like, oh my gosh, this is Black Widow. Or Natasha, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's so much fun. And you put, the two together, and then you add Gunner to the mix, and it's just this really crazy mix. But there's so much tech that you've also woven into these books that
Yeah.
part of me is like, I really hope it's your mind just going crazy. And the other part of me is like, I have a feeling that some of this is actually really out there and available.
Yeah.
So how much of it was you taking something like the red team, which isn't
Yeah.
the tech, but you found something like that and you're like, oh, but what if we took it just a little further? And how much of it
Yeah.
was like, no, this actually is out there. Like Project
Oh,
Symphony. Is that like actually out
yeah.
there?
A lot of the tech is either out there or it is I've taken different pieces of things that are actual and made something that maybe isn't real yet but could be. And
That's
so
terrifying.
yeah, it's crazy once you look at some of the projects that our government has funded and done, and you're just like, what? Artificial blood? And you're just like, what? Plant eating robots? And it's just like
Yeah.
these incredible, almost science fiction-y, kind of projects that are either on the books or have been done by DARPA, their research arm at the Pentagon. And so yeah, there's yeah, it's there's a lot of stuff that we can do, I think, that we as citizens don't know about, like our government
Mhm.
could do or can do, that we don't know about. And so I'm actually happy about that. Like
Yeah.
like I want us to be on the forefront of discoveries and technological breakthroughs and advances. And it's like I want our country to have secrets. And so one of the actual sort of themes of the whole book is secrets. It's like betrayals
Mhm.
and loyalties, and how many secrets should our government keep from us. Should they keep those secrets, and at what point should they release that information of what we have done or are able to do? And so I think it's interesting, and so it
Yeah.
becomes sort of the background of Travis and his struggles as far as what he knows and what he could do with what he knows.
Yeah. No, and it's a big question and a big issue to think through and to wrestle
Yeah.
with, and definitely sets up quite the quandary for the characters, even with what do we do, how do we handle some of the challenges that are placed in front of them, and ethical and not so ethical approaches to handling
Yeah.
things. But I don't want to spoil anything because
I
it
mean, no, that it's so there is a character. I don't think this will spoil too much, but there's this research about into the realm of stopping dementia or
Mhm.
actually increasing people's IQs. And so there's a group that wants to make this tech, basically this drug, available to anyone worldwide, that it would be free. Like they would steal it from the pharmaceutical company that's developing it, but then they would make it available for free because their rationale is, well, if it's just available to the rich countries or the rich people, it'll create even a bigger divide between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor, and like this. But if we could make it available to everyone, it would level the playing field. People could get to this drug even if they have no money or very little money to do so. And so our heroes have to stop them from that. And so you're like, well, wait a minute, is that not a good thing? Like to help
Yeah.
people around the world who maybe have dementia or to stop it from occurring. And so you're like, well, our heroes have to stop it. Well, yes, they have to, because you can't just steal from a pharmaceutical firm and spread their secrets around the
Yeah.
world. And then your question is like, well, why can't you, or shouldn't you, or should you? And see, that's interesting for me. Like
Yeah.
if there's no sort of question or dilemma, I find stories often to be sort of flat. But when I start thinking about maybe the bad guy or whatever, whoever it might be, think, what if they have a point? And they kind of make a
Mhm.
good argument, and you're like, well, they sort of have a point, but they're literally, you cannot murder people and on your way to this good
Yeah.
goal that you might have down the road. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's lots of dilemmas and moral questions in the book.
Well, and that's something that you did really well in the Patrick Bauer series, that you've done really well in this one too, where you've got these villains that it's
Yeah.
clear who the bad guys are, but at the same time, it's clear what's motivating them, and they don't necessarily see themselves as the bad guys.
Yeah.
And there's a motivation where I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't be doing what you're doing, but you can understand why they're being motivated and why they think they're the good guys or the
Yeah.
good gals in what they're
Yeah.
doing. And so it's, and that's what the real world's like. It's not all black hats and white hats. There's usually lots of shades of gray where people are lining up in different places. And so, especially when you get into the disparities of income and countries and all
Wealth
that.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I believe that no one really does something that in that moment they feel is evil. Like no matter what it is, what act it might be, let's
I
say
think
steal.
Turo did. Turo had a moment where he did. Slash, slash, slash. But that's all I'll say about that.
Maybe. I think that I mean, let's just say for the most part, I feel like people when they take an action find a way to justify it, rationalize it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that bad, or I have a good reason for it, whether it's stealing, murder, having an affair, whatever it might be. In that moment, we're telling ourselves something like, well, I'm not as bad as most people, or I really deserve whatever. And so if you can find a way to show that justification to readers in a way that they sort of see the perspective of that character, they might say, yeah, I kind of get that, but then also I want them to feel a little uncomfortable, like, no, that's not a good thing. Like I should not be pursuing this act, this act.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. No, and I think you do that really, really well.
yeah.
So when you're writing these books, um, which comes first for you, the characters or the plot? Or is it a
Um,
blend?
well, it's interesting. I mean, you probably know I write organically. Like I don't plot
Mhm.
anything out or outline at all. And so for me, the story is always emerging as I write. Like I've never started a book where I know how it will end. So as I'm writing, I'm exploring what might happen and I'm discovering the story as I go. And so it's always characters and not plot. So I actually believe that so a lot of people will think about like a story is plot, first act, second act, third act, like this, or beginning, middle, end, whatever paradigm you're looking at. But I don't actually love that because it gives you the impression that a story is about a progression of events instead of a collision of desires. And so what happens is a lot of people will write an event and another event and another event, but that's not a story, that's a report. So like I'm asking not what should happen, but what is pursued. So I'm always going back to the pursuit of the character. Then I'm throwing things at them, setbacks, obstacles like this, to watch how they respond so that they can continue to pursue what they're going after. And so I don't really ask, like, what would make an interesting climax? I always ask, what would make an honest response? And so I want the characters to act in an honest, authentic way. Then, of course, build up. Like I want the escalation, obviously, toward an unforgettable climax, but it's always growing from desire instead of me imposing ideas onto my characters and their stories.
Yeah, and it's a different approach to it, but it works really well. Um, but it is a different way to think of it from not all these a series of events, but really I guess a focus on kind of the internal motivations or
Well, I
the
mean, yeah, it's like intention infused pursuit is one of the things that I think about. So a character always has something that they want, whatever it
Mhm.
is, they want something. And there's different realms where those desires expose themselves. Like internally, we might have a question that we're trying to answer, externally, like a problem to solve, interpersonally, maybe a relationship to start or initiate or restore. And so we have these three realms: internal, external, interpersonal. And it's like we desire something. And that desire precipitates itself through the questions or through the actions and choices we make. It's like, I want something. What is it? Well, I go after it. but things get in the way. And so, yeah, so I feel like the more you understand story, the less you have to plot out a story
Mhm.
and the less you write by the seat of your pants. You're not doing either. You're actually following what would naturally occur based on these characters' intentions when they face these setbacks and obstacles. So, yeah, so I'm very much into the idea of organic writing. And so as you pursue it, obviously you'll think, well, what if this? Like, what if this happened at the climax? And so like I always want the climax to be something that is a moment at which all seems lost. So I'm always trying to write myself into a corner. A lot of people will say, well, you shouldn't write organically or whatever because you might write yourself into a corner. I'm like, absolutely. That is
Mhm.
the first thing I'm trying to do is write myself into a corner where like I don't know what the character's going to do or say or think or how they're going to respond. And then to find a way out of the corner in a way that's unexpected and yet inevitable. So when it happens, we're like, oh, I should have guessed that. So I'm looking to like I actually think of it as like these narrative forces. Okay, so it sounds a little weird, but let's say there's a big ball of clay and we're pressing in on it, and like one person is tension, another is believability and escalation, and we have all of these people sort of pressing in on the story. Anyway, so for me, that's what I think of is like this force of believability and escalation. Those are really important ones to press in on the story. So I don't know how it's going to look when I start writing, but I do know it's going to be a moment at which all seems lost. You're going to solve it in a way that's logical but unexpected. And so I know what's true of the climax, even though I don't have any idea what it will look like when I start. And then as you write, you're thinking about those aspects and setbacks to write yourself into the moment at which all seems lost. And that leads then to, I feel like, the climax of the story.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That is such a good way of phrasing it. And what I love about it is everybody does it differently. And so I think it's so important, especially for aspiring or not as experienced writers, to hear different perspectives and different ways of approaching it, because we can get very locked into it has to be this way or that way. And I'm like, no, actually, everybody does it a little differently. And I mean, I was just taking lots of notes
Oh, funny.
because no, I mean, I literally was, because the more I write, the more I realize every book's a little different.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm a very logical person when I'm writing because I'm a lawyer. I'm
Yeah.
very logical in how I approach things. But to keep things fresh for me and for readers, I realize that even though, I mean, like, I know like the scope of how a legal suspense needs to go. There are certain things that need to happen, but to keep it fresh and interesting, it has to be organic. It has to be different. And so that for me, that means there have to be like five what ifs all twisted together to make a
Yeah.
completely brand new story. And then
Yeah.
you don't know what's going to happen. I might know a few peak moments, but I
Hmm.
don't know how we're going to get there. I don't know
Yeah.
how we're going to get out of them. And so it does become more organic, actually, the more complicated it becomes, but it has to become more complicated or else it just feels cookie cutter. And I don't want to write that because that's boring.
Actually,
And I
really
don't want to read
agree.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I know. It's like you want to respect the conventions of the genre. So, like, I'm not
Yeah.
saying you're going to write something that's completely just idiotic or nonsensical. That's just not it at all. But so you're going to respect those conventions, but always move away from the cliches. And so I feel like when I'm writing, I kind of know sort of some conventions of maybe a spy espionage story or a thriller or suspense. And what I want to do is play to those expectations that readers are going to be reading, thinking, I know where this is going. Like, you
Yeah.
know, like they're going to say, oh, okay, I know what he's doing here. But I want them to think that. But then I don't want it to go there. Like, I want it to
Yeah.
end where they're like, what? And then
Yes.
think, oh,
Yeah.
yes. So it's really trying to respect your readers, and
Yeah.
and that they come to a story with a lot of expectations, but also a very astute narrative way of looking at stories. We're very narratively astute today, because we experience stories since we're little in so many ways every day, whether it's through videos, television, movies, and books. But so that what worked maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago or 100 years ago or whatever would never work today
Yeah.
because people would expect more. And they should, because the understanding of story is maturing and evolving. And so, like, when I, you know, read something that maybe is 40 years old, sometimes I read it and I'm astonished. I'm like, this is so amazing. Like, this is so good. And sometimes I'm reading it thinking, yeah, this wouldn't get published today because it's too predictable, cookie cutter, whatever it is. So
Yeah,
yeah. So,
exactly. And then when we're surprised by something, that's when I'm like, oh, now I need to study that so I can figure out how they did it, not to copy it, but so
yeah.
that then my repertoire for
Yeah.
how to think more creatively kind of gets another layer added to it. Because I think that that's what makes writing so challenging and
Mm,
fun is, think about Fatal Domain. You've got, the hero's unique, the heroine's unique, the
yeah.
third character's unique, and then you're layering 3 or 4 different types of technology. One of the villains is kind of your stereotypical Russian guy, but then the other villain is so not stereotypical. And then you kind of
Yeah.
have a third villain who's
There
kind
were
of
too
out
many villains.
there. There were a
So
lot of villains in this
there were
book.
a lot of
And then
villains in
there's,
this story. Yeah.
yeah, and then you've got them all twisted together. And so when you add all that together, you've got so many different directions the book can go. It can't be a stereotype.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm
Oh, I was just gonna say, when I wrote Broker of Lies, I just kept throwing in like teasers and
yeah.
for future books. Like I said, I write organically. So I'm like, well, this would be interesting. So I threw these characters in. So then I'm writing Fatal Domain and I was like, what am I gonna do? Like, I literally have like 9 bad guys or
Yeah.
women, men, whatever, like what am I gonna do? So somehow I have to find, because there's a lot of them. And they're all a little different and they're all a little unique and they want a little different things. But yeah, I was like, I'm not doing that again. That was so hard to
Yeah,
find
there were
out.
a lot of them.
Yeah.
And you're like, you gotta now satisfy us with what happened to all of
Oh,
them.
yeah. That was
And yet,
one of the biggest challenges of the story. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
all the villains.
all the villains. And there were a lot of villains, but you did it. So, well, you
No,
did
thank
it.
you.
You pulled it all together. So, as we wrap this up, uh, when you kind of like distill what you write down, what should readers expect from a Stephen James book?
I love to write toward a pivot, which is those moments I just mentioned that's unexpected and inevitable. So, like, every scene, I'm trying to say, how could I surprise readers? Like, I really feel like when we read a book, we come with this hope that we'll be surprised. Now, we also might know the direction of the story based on the genre, right? Like romance or a spy story or whatever. We're kind of like, okay, I kind of know, but we want to be surprised in ways that make sense. So always, every scene, I'm asking myself, how can I actually do that? How can I pivot toward a place where they don't expect it, but they do appreciate it when it comes? And so hopefully the books will honor the conventions, but also offer surprises. I love suspense. So there's always suspense. Like, I can't seem to write a book where there aren't thrills and suspense. And so, and I love, they're a little complex. So they're not dumbed down books, which is fine. I mean, I'm nothing against whatever people want to read, but they're a little bit complex, intricate, because that's just what interests me the most in writing. I know they're a little bit dinosaurs, like, it's like they're complex, and a lot of books that are selling, it's like 200 pages and there's like one storyline. I'm like, yeah,
Yep.
that's not my specialty. So a
It's
little
not
more
mine either. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
let's add lots of fun stuff into it.
yeah,
But I can say that people who like an intricate plot with
yeah.
lots of good suspense and characters who are not cookie cutter at all
Hmm.
are going to love your books.
Thank you.
I
Yeah.
will, I come back to the Patrick Bauer series all the time. It's truly one of my favorites. And so it's been so much fun to have you on today. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for
Yeah.
making time. And I have loved Broker of Secrets and Fatal Domain. They are both fantastic. So thank you so much, Stephen.